2025 World Relays are in the books, and today I want to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. I have a couple takeaways and some highlights from the 2025 World Relays, which, actually exceeded my expectations in different ways, but it also had a lot of negative, aspects to it that we definitely have to talk about it. So good, the bad, the ugly. You can go check out the timestamps that I left in the description if you want to fast forward to check out some things. We're going to talk about everything from South Africa to Jamaica to the United States to Botswana to the visa issues. We're going to dive into it all. So let's start off, of course, with that good. And of course, South Africa was the highlight of the 2025 World Relays in Guangzhou. They won the men's 4x1 as well as the 4x4, and they got the second place in the women's 4x4. But that men's 4x1, Simbine, he anchored South Africa to a gold medal in 37.61 seconds, which is, of course, a world lead, but it's actually not too far off their national record of 37.57, which they set last year to get the silver medal at the Olympic Games. What I love about South Africa, the men's team here, is that they actually used, 3 of their 4 core guys from the Paris Olympics, where you had Banda Walaza, you had Nkwana, you had Simbine, of course, on that anchor. So only Masongani, who got the silver, who's on the team last year, or even Benjamin Richardson, right? Those are probably the only 2 guys who they can sub in. And the fact that they're running this fast already, this was a really amazing performance for South Africa. And I think that Canada, I had them as probably the favorites entering the World Championships this year, considering they've practiced so much as a team, considering they're the reigning Olympic champions in the 4x1. But I'm going to slightly edge out South Africa now. I feel that that team is on one, where they are just consistent. Someone like Simbine is hungry. He probably realizes they has a few more championships in him, and he wants to make sure he gets on the podium once again. Of course, individually, but also to carry on things for South Africa. So looking forward to seeing what they did, but that 4x1 was absolutely immaculate. But then they doubled back and got the win in the 4x4 in a national record. And someone can comment below, is this a national record? For some reason, I'm not seeing it being reported or announced as a national record. But South Africa men, they ran 3:57.50 seconds, which is faster than the national record that they ran last year of 3:58.12 seconds at the Paris Olympic Games in the final, right, where they just missed the podium. So from my understanding, it's a national record. It's number 7 all time when talking about the 4x4 in history. And they had a strong contingent of guys. You're talking about Nene, who split 43 seconds, both in the heats and the finals. Very, very amazing performances for the men's 4x4 from South Africa. And also, shout out to the women 4x4. They also ran a national record in the final, getting second place overall. South Africa was on one. They were the stars of the Guangzhou World Relays in 2025. So shout out to them. But just after that, number 2 on the good side is Spain women. They dominated the 4x1, beating out Jamaica in the heats, and then actually, beating out a lot of teams, including Jamaica and the United States in the final for the 4x1. They did lose to Great Britain, but they got the second place there. Then they got the gold medal in the 4x4, actually running down the United States on anchor leg. So Spain really showed up and showed out. They got a national record, of course, across the board as well for the women. This was a great championships for them, with South Africa, and I think Spain is probably the second overall in terms of, a highlight being Guangzhou here. So amazing performances for Spain's women. Number 3 on the good side, Great Britain's women in the 4x1. Like I said, Spain got silver, but Great Britain ran down the entire field. And we're talking about success to get the win over the entire field. Great Britain, gold medal in the 4x1 for the women, and 2 of the women on their team are actually young guns who probably won't be used when we get to the World Championships later on, right? We're talking about Nia Wedderburn-Goddardson as well as Success Edwan. So both of them are 20 years old. And this is them running a team. Again, Success ran down Jamaica with Sharika Jackson, ran down the United States with TeeTee Terry, who kind of had a really strong leg, but, got ran down Spain, who had an amazing championships, to get the gold medal. And she's only 20 years old. Think about it. Great Britain is going to go to the World Championships, and they're going to sub in Dean Asher-Smith. They're going to sub in Daryl Nita, all right? Obviously, you have Amy Hunt. They might sub in someone like Imani Lansiquat as well, right? Those 4, Amy Hunt, Imani, as well as Daryl and Dina, they ran on the Olympic Games 4x1 last year. So Great Britain, the women's 4x1, just shows how they're able to remain consistent year after year after year. They are probably, along with Jamaica, the United States, like the most consistent 4x1 that we've seen in a long time. So shout out to Great Britain. They have a very, very deep bench. Now, number 4, Kenya. The Kenyan men's 4x1. They deserve a huge shout out for the good that appeared here. They actually qualified to the World Championships in the 4x1. Of course, you know, Fernando Manyala, this was a big moment for him. He's always been individually, but to have a nation that's known as a distance powerhouse qualifying in the 4x1, big kudos to them. This is the first time that we're going to see Kenya at the World Championships in the 4x1, but the last time that they were at either Worlds or Olympics was at the 1988 Olympic Games in Seoul, South Korea. So it just speaks to how, you know, they've been dominant on the distance side, but now they're actually showing up on the sprint side. Again, huge shout outs to Kenya and the men's 4x1. Let's follow up. 3 more good things here. Botswana and their men's 4x4. They were missing some of their top names. You're talking about Letile Toboho. You're talking about Kebana Shipi. You're talking about Pesela, Ndori. All 4 of those guys who were the 4x4 that won the silver medal last year at the Olympics, they were not here. But Botswana still managed to qualify to the World Championships running 2:58.27 seconds, which is the 4th fastest time in the history of Botswana. The only other times that they've run faster were at the 2021 Olympic Games when they got on the podium there. Also, of course, at the 2024 Olympic Games when they got on the podium in the final, and the time that they ran in the prelims, and then it's this time. So the fact that they were able to put together a squad running 2:58, their 4th fastest time ever, despite not having the 4 guys who actually got on the podium last year, that speaks wonders for what they're capable of when those guys do get back into the fold, but then also the deep bench and the talent pool that they have that's on the rise and consistently growing. I'm excited to see what Botswana is able to do, and listen, we're going to talk about the other guys who were missing, but this was a great performance for Botswana. Now, let's finish up 2 other things. First off, TeeTee Terry and Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce. This was a good highlight from me here as well. TeeTee Terry, in my opinion, is arguably the most consistent 4x100 meter runner that the USA on the women's side has right now. She ran in 2022, where she ran the anchor leg to get the gold medal for the United States at Worlds. She ran in 2023 when she ran second leg, a blistering second leg at the Budapest World Championships. And then of course, she ran second leg once again in 2024 at the Olympic Games. And every single time, whether it's 2022 when she had to hold her composure to, you know, hold off Sharika Jackson, who was in top form, whether it was 2023 when she had to really work in the prelims to get the baton to Tamara Clark, or in the final to get the baton to Gabby Thomas in very tight situations, or in 2024 both in the prelims and the finals when again Gabby Thomas and her didn't have the greatest handoff, but she remained composed. Here we saw the viral video, Kayla White coming in, she missed the handoff, but TeeTee Terry remained composed, kept her hand, you know, straight. Kayla White obviously grabbed it and put the baton in there, but TeeTee Terry is one of the gems when talking about USA relay running in the 4x1. You know, she's not even one of the top 100 meter sprinters, right? Yes, Shakira Richardson, Melissa Jefferson, et cetera, but like she deserves to be on that 4x1. I don't know what you got to do. I don't even care if she makes a team. She deserves to be on that 4x1. But also with TeeTee Terry, on Jamaica's side, you have Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce. I think she was the standout, of course, for Jamaica and amongst some of the other top 100 meter sprinters at the World Relays here. She ran an amazing second leg, both in the heats and the finals. You know, Jamaica, of course, they didn't do well when it came to the 4x1 finals, but Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce proving that she is in excellent form and she is not to be played with. Huge shout outs to Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce and TeeTee Terry for really holding things down for Jamaica as well as the United States respectively. Now, let's get to the bad. So we got the good, covered that. We got some bad things, and then we'll dive into the ugly. First off, the bad. We're talking about Jamaican women. Let's talk about the Jamaican men. Jamaican men's 4x1. This was a disaster. This was a disaster all around. I was really positive considering they were bringing all their top guys outside of Oblique Seville to the World Relays. You know, Akeem Blake, he got a little injured at Grand Slam track, so he wasn't able to compete here. But they had a really strong squad, but disaster struck in the heats and in the repechage rounds, you know, to qualify. So they didn't qualify. Let's get that clear. They didn't qualify to the World Championships yet. They have to follow up at some point. In the heats, we saw Julian Fort as well as Johan Blake. Julian was on second leg, Johan Blake was on third. They botched the handoff. They weren't able to get it, you know, successfully. And Kashane Thompson, who was on anchor, he didn't touch the baton. So they got another chance in the repechage rounds the next day, but in the repechage rounds, Julian Fort, again, unfortunately, he actually got injured literally right before he passed the baton to Johan Blake. Came down with an injury, fell to the track. It was devastating. I really hope that he's healthy, but you know, unfortunately, again, the narrative is that Kashane Thompson just did not get to touch the baton. We saw him last year at the Paris Olympics. He kind of had a not good handoff on the anchor leg, so they weren't able to qualify into the final. But now, after this, World Relays being used as a qualifier, they're not officially qualified for the World Championships later on this year. So what that means is they're going to have to potentially find another time to qualify, and get a really fast time. They might have an opportunity at the London Diamond League, which is happening on July 14th or July 20th later on this summer. They have until August 24th to be able to get a time that would put them in the top 16 in the world. So all the teams at World Relays, they already qualified, but you have to have a time that's in the top 16 in the world if you actually want to get to the World Championships later on this year. It's going to be very tough. And the reason that I say that is not because of the time. We know that they have the talent to be able to qualify, but the personnel that they'll have to get together. Someone like Kashane Thompson, he simply doesn't run frequently enough because we know that he's injury prone, so he's not always out there on the circuit. Is he going to, take the opportunity to go to the London Diamond League to actually compete in maybe an individual event or a relay here, or maybe both, whatever it may be? That's going to be a question as it relates to his entire schedule. Someone like Oblique Seville, he also doesn't compete very frequently. He's also been dealing with injuries the past couple years. Is he going to go to London and actually compete on a relay? We saw last year that Jamaica wasn't able to qualify at World Relays in the 4x4. They had a couple chances after that, whether it was, I think, down in the Bahamas and then once again at Jamaica Trials. None of those times did they get a successful time to qualify to the Olympics. Hopefully that's not the situation here. Hopefully Jamaica is able to run fast enough to get a qualifying time to the World Championships, but they are in a very, very, very precarious situation. So it's tricky, but Jamaican men, this was a bad outcome for them at the World Relays. Now, number 2, visa issues. Visa issues plague the World Relays, and it's something that you don't want to see. Nigeria and the Dominican Republic were not able to field teams because none of their athletes were able to obtain visas from the Chinese embassy. Nigeria, all their athletes were denied visas, and they had athletes in almost all the relays, right? The 4x1, the 4x4, the mixed relay, across the board. But Nigeria, the AFN, they blamed the Chinese Federation and the Chinese embassy. Then China, they denied any responsibility. You saw World Athletics, they were saying, that's between we're out of this. I don't know, it was a whole mess. And Nigeria, unfortunately, it's very well known for not being logistically sound in terms of getting their athletes, together and everything ready for them to compete to the best of their ability. Famously, the Tokyo Olympics in 2021, that was devastating when so many athletes weren't able to compete while they were already in Tokyo. Crazy. So this is just another thing here. So it's going to be tough. They need another opportunity to be able to qualify to the World Championships. We'll see if that happens. But a similar thing happened with the Dominican Republic. They had entered a men's 4x1 team as well as a mixed relay 4x4, and they were they medaled at the Tokyo Olympic Games in 2021. They medaled at the 2022 World Championships, the gold medalist there in the mixed relay. So they were trying to field another team to be able to qualify for this World Championships, but their visas got denied, so they're not going to be competing, or they have to maybe find another opportunity to qualify. We'll see if that actually comes into fruition. But again, devastating. This was absolutely bad for the World Relays. Now, a couple others when it comes to the bad. The mixed 4x1. The mixed 4x1, in my opinion, now people may have different opinions, but I think this was just bad. This was purely an afterthought for pretty much every country that was competing, where they just didn't use any of their top athletes. They chose to focus on the regular 4x1, the men's and the women's side, and the men's and women's 4x4s, as well as a mixed 4x4 to a degree as well. No one really put their top athletes there. It was an afterthought. Not only just the United States, but pretty much all nations across the board. It's going to be debuting at the 2028 Olympic Games in Los Angeles, so we're going to see the mixed 4x1 there. It's not going to be in 2025 this year at World Champs, but I wouldn't be surprised if it comes to 2027 for World Athletics to kind of roll it out there. Not confirmed yet, but we'll see. But again, at the end of the day, this was bad because every country just treated it as an afterthought, and it really just, I don't know, it just wasn't the focus of attention. And I don't even know if it, I don't know. I'm still very, very mixed on mixed relays in general, the 4x4 and now the mixed 4x1. Put a 4x2, put a 4x8, put a DMR. Like, what are we doing, World Athletics? Anyway, the other bad that I do have, two others. Côte d'Ivoire. This was devastating to see. The Côte d'Ivoire women in the 4x1, they weren't able to qualify. They weren't successful. They didn't have, their top gunners. Myrla Houre, she retired after the end of 2024. Marie-Josée Talou, she wasn't competing. She hasn't competed in 2025 yet, so still TBD on her status. You also didn't have Jessica Gabai. So that's been the core for women, where you had Côte. She's always been part of the relay as well. They've been pretty close to getting on the podium. 2023 dealt with injuries with Talou. 2024 they dealt with some setbacks and things like that. but they unfortunately just were not able to qualify to the World Championships this year, and it's really tough. Going to see how they do kind of pick things up and as they go forward, but this was tough to see, really bad, because Côte d'Ivoire has so much potential and has been one of the stronger teams over the past couple years, despite not getting on the podium yet. Now, last one, the bad is Bahamas not sending any teams to the World Relays. They announced beforehand that they just didn't have deep enough of a squad to be able to send teams to the World Relays to field either a 4x1 or 4x4 mixed relay, and it's really tough because Bahamas hosted the 2014, 2015, 2017, and 2024 World Relays because of their culture of, you know, being in the Caribbean, but then also having some really strong relays. We've seen them on the podium in different capacities. They're the gold medalists in the 4x4 from 2012, but they weren't able to put together a relay here. And it's tough because they have so much talent between Wanya McCoy and Stephen Gardner, even though both of them, I think they got injured this year. Stephen Gardner, of course, got injured. Wanya McCoy got injured indoors. You have Terrence Jones, you have Devin Charlton, you have Charisma Taylor. All three of them are still competing in different capacities, right? Terrence Jones, a sprinter, Devin Charlton, hurdler, Charisma Taylor, hurdler and triple jumper. But then you also have someone like Shana Miluibo, who still is competing, but not 100% sure of her status. It's just tough to see Bahamas in a situation like this where they're not able to field a team to the World Relays, despite being a team that has so much potential. So that was another bad thing for me when it comes to the World Relays. But finally, let's dive into that ugly. And I have 4 aspects of the World Relays that were just ugly. Not necessarily bad, but just like, ugh, you know, things that, not looking good. First off, Team USA. Team USA was just ugly. In my opinion, they were just ugly. Of course, on paper, Team USA is, of course, the fastest across the board in pretty much every event. When talking about the depth of talent, when talking about the speed that they can put on the track, but it was ugly. They was really, really ugly. You're talking about, they didn't send the top athletes, right? They didn't send Gabby Thomas. You didn't see a Noah Lyles. You didn't see Melissa Jefferson Wooden, Sadie McLaughlin-Roney, right? A ton of athletes who, you know, would be and likely will be competing at the World Championships on these relays. They just weren't here. You also saw someone like Arianayan. He was originally on the team to compete at World Relays, but he pulled out, you know, last minute. There was some discussion around him having his court case for his positive test from last year. That was earlier in the week, but who knows if that actually was the situation. So a bunch of top names just did not compete. On top of that, the first race of the weekend, the mixed 4x1, the United States dropped the baton. Like, it was just embarrassing. Again, I personally don't really care that much for the mixed 4x1, but it just didn't set a good precedent and was just terrible optics for the team dropping the baton. Off top of that, you have extremely sketchy handoffs on both the men's and the women's 4x1s, specifically on the anchor legs. Like I said with the women, Kayla White to TeeTee Terry, as like viral as it went, as like great as it was that TeeTee Terry kept her composure, it was a bad handoff. Like, it was just not a good handoff. Now, they got things together in the final, though they got 4th place, but it was just not a good handoff. Then on the men's side, you had Kyrie King handing off to Brandon Hicklin. Brandon Hicklin left early, and it wasn't a great handoff. Now, they did qualify to the final, they did qualify and, you know, get all their teams to the World Championships and all that, but it just wasn't a good handoff. And, you know, eventually in the final, we saw that Brandon Hicklin, he isn't in a Nkani Simbine realm in any capacity, so he got ran down by a Simbine, but just not great handoffs on the 4x1s. And then add to that, they lost both races in the 4x1s. Again, on paper, the United States, especially that team with the men's side, Courtney Lindsay to Kenny B to Kyrie King to Brandon Hicklin, that entire team actually should be faster than any team on the track, but they just didn't get it together. So, you know, they lost. And the women, they lost it. You know, that was a mixed team, but it is what it is. Then the other thing, like I kind of alluded to at the top, where they don't have the top names, these are not going to be the teams that are actually running at the World Championships later on this summer. Like I said, Noah Lyles is 100% going to be on the relay. He doesn't even have to compete at USA trials. Well, he doesn't have to qualify at US trials, right? He already has a wild card in the 100 and the 200. So we know that he's going to be in Tokyo and he's going to be on that relay. Someone like Gabby Thomas, she's going to be on the relay. Melissa Jefferson Wooden, she's going to be on the relay. Cindy McLaughlin-Roney, she's going to be on the relay. There's so many athletes. Maybe Christian Coleman, you know, he might be on the relay if he makes a team. So many athletes are potentially going to be on the team when we get to Tokyo, and they're potentially going to be competing on the relays, where it just sets a bad precedent where they just didn't get enough practice, which really does not look good and may lead to potential issues. Who knows? But we'll see. The final thing is the fact that they got rid of Michelle Lewis-Freeman, and the fact that they originally at the World Relays last year in 2024, I think they had won 5 gold medals in the relay. This time they only won a single gold medal, which was on the mixed 4x4. So it just kind of highlights how you take out arguably one of the greatest relay coaches in history with Michelle Lewis Freeman. She won gold in 2022, gold in 2023, gold in 2024 on the women's 4x1, and then also tons of accolades in the 4x4. You take her out, and then you replace her with, you know, a great person in terms of their current relay coach, but now you can kind of see the initial results. Now, again, who knows how this is going to translate when we get to the World Championships, but the optics are just terrible, and this is at least the first example of the repercussions of taking out your top relay coach in a long time. Now, number two, Team Jamaica. Like I noted with the men, Team Jamaica on the women's side was also kind of sketchy. They brought their very strong teams, right? They brought some of their top teams on both the men's and the women's side. I already spoke about the men in terms of the disaster that we unfortunately saw on that side. But despite them having their top teams and bringing them together to be able to, you know, practice and qualify to the World Championships, they just did okay, and it was generally mixed results, right? Like I said, men, that was tragic, right? They got to find another way to be able to qualify. And then the women, they did okay for the most part as well, specifically on the 4x1 side where they qualified safely, and that was the goal. So they're going to the World Championships, that is what it is. But then they lost the 4x1 where Shericka Jackson got run down, finishing eventually 3rd place to Great Britain and Spain. And then in the post-race interview, shout out to Lils, who got to interview Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, but Shelly-Ann she essentially indicated that this wasn't like a training camp, and they weren't necessarily like spending a lot of time together in terms of that practice and all that. So I don't know, here's a clip.
Honestly, I think we've been here a very short time. It's not really a camp situation. It's more like, you know, your different rooms in that big hotels. You don't see them, but when you do, it's always positive, you know, and it's a good energy to know that you have young athletes who are, you know, they're confident and they're determined and they're committed to this. So you know that whatever happens next, they're in, you know, Jamaica track and field is in good hands.
Again, shout out to Lils for the clip. I'll put the full interview in the description. So, I don't know, it felt a little, it's interesting. I wish they would have gotten a lot more practice in. The other thing that was interesting is that Tia Clayton was in the prelims of the 4x1, but she was not in the prelims, in the final of the 4x1. They instead used Natasha Morrison. And that's perfectly fine, right? But it was just interesting because Tia Clayton is probably currently the most talented, you know, 100-meter sprinter for the new generation, right? Where she made the Olympic Games 100-meter final last year. She ran 10.8 a couple times last year. Of course, her sister, Tina Clayton, very, very talented, and was, prior to Tia getting to where she's at, was probably the stronger of the twins. But it's interesting where Tia Clayton was taken out despite her potentially being one of the next generation. So you'd want her to get more practice. And you know that they already qualified. So even if they dropped the baton or whatever, like, would it have mattered? I don't know. But that was an interesting decision for Jamaica. And then the other thing, like, Shericka, unfortunately, she didn't look great. Now, I know that the discussion, and I've said it very much myself, where, you know, she has until September, right? She doesn't have to be ready right now. She doesn't have to be in peak form right now. We don't even know if she's going to run the 100 meters in 2025. Her focus, of course, is the 200. But, you know, I don't think that she came here to lose. I don't think that she came here to finish second in the prelims and then 3rd place in the final. Shericka Jackson is someone who wants to win. She wants to finish on top, regardless of what race it is. Yes, the goal is to qualify, but I'm not saying I'm worried in incapacity. I'm just saying that, you know, she didn't look as great. I want to see that fierce, that dominant Shericka that, you know, is able to run some of these athletes down. But, you know, we didn't see it. So just adding to the narrative that, you know, Jamaica overall didn't look as great. So that's my overall kind of ugly part. Not bad, but just ugly. We'll see how things go. Now, last two, Botswana Athletes not competing at the World Relays. So I alluded to the fact that the men's 4x4 for Botswana, they competed at the, you know, and they qualified to the World Championships. They ran extremely fast, 2:58. But we saw essentially the entire Olympic 4x4 for Botswana pull out from the World Championships here. And it's Latsilit Boho, it's Kebenat Shipi, as well as Bapundori. And then you also had Antti Pesela. He wasn't quoted as having pulled out, but he wasn't here, and that's the entire 4x4 from the games. Now, all of them pulled out, and it was speculation that it was financial issues, but nothing is confirmed, so I'm not going to say that it was financial issues. The Botswana Athletics Federation, they put out a statement saying that it was for personal reasons that all of them pulled out. Then Latsilit Boho, he also released a statement saying that it was in the best interest of all parties and in alignment with his long-term goals as an athlete. So I don't know, all these like interesting statements as to why athletes are pulling out and, you know, what that federation has to say. Who knows what the truth is in the background, but again, the team still qualified for the World Championships in Tokyo. They ran extremely fast. They have that depth, but I just hope that this isn't a long-term kind of issue that may translate when we get to the World Championships later on this year or, you know, in future years. Hopefully something gets worked out and things are good. We all want to see, you know, Toboho, Kebenachipi, Pesela, Undori. We want to see them competing along with some of these other guys, but, you know, hopefully there's no issues. Now, finally, the last ugly that I do have is a mixed 4x4. Similar to the mixed 4x1, but maybe not as, you know, detrimental as bad, but just ugly because it was almost an afterthought for a lot of countries as well and just really wasn't memorable, where a lot of nations, they just didn't field some of their top athletes in the competition. You even saw countries like the Netherlands just completely skip out. They already are going to compete at the World Championships because they have a good enough time, but I don't know, many athletes in many countries just, you know, really took this as an afterthought. Dominican Republic, they didn't get visas, so they couldn't compete here. Also, look at someone like Ireland. Ireland, they ran in the heats and they qualified to the World Championships, and they had someone like Rashida Adeleke on that team. But then they just switched out their entire team that ran in the heats of the mixed 4x4, and they just ran essentially like a B or C team and finished last place in that final because they were like, all right, we qualified, so we're good. We don't even have to compete. So that speaks to how much of an afterthought, you know, some countries treated this mixed 4x4. Again, it's ugly because it's serious. Like, you have the mixed 4x4 at the World Championships, and the goal is to qualify, but I don't know. I feel like I want countries to take it a little more seriously, but I also understand the dynamics of the 4x1 and the 4x4 in terms of men's and women's side. Those are the primary events that teams are going to be focusing on. So I don't know, but that's the ugly. So overall, long video, but the good, the bad, the ugly as it comes to the 2025 World Relays in Guangzhou, China. This was a qualifier to the World Championships in Tokyo later on this year. If a team did not qualify through the World Relays here, they will have until August 24th to be able to get a time that's in the top 16 in the world to qualify for Worlds in Tokyo. So teams like Jamaica, they're going to have to do that. You have a couple other teams who are on the fringes and might have to do that as well. Also, just a reminder, the 4x1, the mixed 4x1 is not going to be at the World Championships this year in 2025. They just were piloting the event in 2025 at the World Relays here, but it's been announced that it will be at the 2028 Olympic Games, so not going to be in Tokyo this year. The last thing I do want to say is that I am really, really excited, and I love the fact that the World Relays is being used as a qualifier for the World Championships. It makes the process very clear. It's none of this like descending order lists or none of this like, you know, world rankings or other things that may or may not be used. Like, none of that. It's just come to the World Relays, qualify, get top 2 in the heats. If you do that, you qualify, you automatically qualify. If you go to the repechage rounds, you get top 2 there, sometimes a time qualifier, and then you automatically qualify. Makes things very clear cut for these countries to be able to understand how they get to the World Championships, specifically in the relays, which are not frequently run, which I absolutely love. Now, visa issues, China, that's a whole other issue, but that was the World Relays. Let me know what you think. Again, the good, the bad, the ugly. You can go back to the timestamps below to check out, you know, all my thoughts across the board. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Always appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching.